Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Iran's secret weapon. No, it's not their nuke or any of their missiles or bombs. No, it's not terror or even their spies. And no, it's not their new high-tech virus which they're sending all over the world and infecting countries all over the world. Iran's secret weapon is, hold on, their small rubber boats. I know this needs an explanation, but first, a bit of background. As the ship named British Heritage, a British oil tanker, prepared to enter the waters of the Straits of Hormuz, a group of small speedboats came around and asked that it change course into Iranian waters. The speedboats communicated with the tanker via ship radio. And now here it comes. These were no ordinary speedboats. They are well known to be notorious. They are a stealth weapon, part of the arsenal of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Luckily, the tanker was being escorted from behind by the HMS Montrose, a vessel of the British Royal Navy, and they too heard the Iranian demand. The British warship trained its guns on the Iranian boats and demanded that the Iranians evacuate immediately. This story is not nautical lore, originally reported by the United States, by the way, and the United Kingdom has since confirmed the incident. The Americans, who also heard the threat and immediately scrambled fighter jets that were already on location in the area, thought that 5 speedboats were involved. Interestingly, the British made a correction to the report that there were 3 Iranian vessels. British Heritage is owned by BP, British Petroleum, the London-based multinational oil and gas company, and the British are fully aware that their vessels are at great risk of being taken captive by Iranian forces. In fact, the previous week, Iran had publicly threatened to seize a British ship. The Iranian threat against the British vessels was a case of tit for tat. It was a response to the British seizure of Grace 1, an Iranian nationally owned supertanker off the coast of Gibraltar. The British seized the Iranian ship and arrested its captain for breaking the sanctions against Syria. At the time of the seizure, Grace 1 was bringing badly needed oil to Syria. The apparent humanitarian gesture was in violation of UN Security Council sanctions on Syrian imports of oil. It was a grandstand move by both the Iranians and by the British. Of course, sanctions are important and, once imposed, need to be enforced. But everyone knows Syria can get as much oil as it wants from Russia. So the British are on alert, knowing that Iran is gunning for them in the sea. And they are responding by raising their level of threat to level 3 and escorting many non-military commercial ships as they can with military vessels. It's hardly a plan. There were 800 British commercial ships at sea. Thankfully, only about 50 ships are in the Gulf and in the region. But even escorting 50 ships can be extremely problematic. According to the report issued by the United States and then corroborated by Great Britain, the 3 speedboats were positioned in front of the British Heritage when they tried to commandeer the ship. Iran intended to prevent the ship from entering the straits, but the HMS Montrose prevented that from happening by wedging itself between the vessels and demanding that the Iranians leave. The Iranian plan to have the British ship wade into Iranian territorial waters was foiled by the HMS Montrose. Why would Iran attempt such a clumsy move on the BP tanker with the Royal Navy warship right there? According to British Defense Ministry report, and I'm quoting here, the Iranian vessels were trying to divert the Heritage from international to Iranian waters, unquote. Then they would be able to capture the boat. True. But that's too simple and too obvious a response. Not surprisingly, Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif offered his own response. Zarif's response was that, and I'm quoting here again, there is no validity to the reports, unquote. Of course, they would deny the attack, if for no other reason than it was so bungled and so abysmally unsuccessful. Embarrassing, even. The only explanation for such a feeble strike is that the Iranian speedboats, true to form, approached the British Heritage undetected. Only after they made their threat were they discovered. Then the HMS Montrose sprang into action. Nothing happens in a vacuum with Iran. What may seem on the surface to be unrelated incidents are really intertwined incidents. All we have to do is connect the dots. The dots we have to play with now are the arrest by Britain of the Iranian tanker near Gibraltar, the downing of the U.S. drone by Iran, and the attacks on various international merchant ships. The United States has already proposed that a coalition force be formed to police the region around the Straits of Hormuz and protect the waterway. The region is ripe for pirates. The Straits of Hormuz run between Oman on one side and Iran on the other. They are extremely narrow, and despite all this, anywhere between 20% and 30% of the world's oil passes through the Straits of Hormuz every single day. One of the details of the U.S. plan is that the United States has said that they do not want to foot the entire cost of the project alone. The area of the Straits of Hormuz is an important regional asset, and it is just as important an asset for the Western world and for the entire world. The foiled and failed interception of the British Heritage and the downing of the drone and the other attacks, they are all wake-up calls. Iran is not asleep on the job. Neither should we be. The Iranian plan to dominate the world has not been abandoned. Keeping the theme of enemies of the West, let's move from Iran to Hezbollah. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has gone public with an outline of Hezbollah's next conflict with Israel. Nasrallah announced, and here I'm quoting again exactly from Nasrallah's words, "In the next war with Israel, we will have surprises in land, air, and sea," unquote. He went on to explain that the resistance, which means perpetrators of terror and his own forces, can reach, and here's the quote again, "the whole of Israel until Eilat," unquote. Eilat is the southernmost part of Israel. Nasrallah was not stingy with his details. He said that he is, quote, "confident of victory," unquote, and confident that, and this is important, quote, "Israel is weaker than a spider web." He also said, "Life and death are in the hands of God, yet logic points to me praying at Al-Aqsa in the Al-Aqsa Mosque." Al-Aqsa is, of course, the great mosque in Jerusalem. Nasrallah described how Hezbollah could strike sensitive targets in the southern and northern parts of Israel. He said, and I'm quoting again, "In the next war with us, Israel will be fighting for its existence, and I will be praying in Jerusalem," unquote. These comments were made during an interview on Al-Manar TV, the Hezbollah TV cable television station, explaining that Hezbollah is not afraid even though Israel has previously killed many Hezbollah members and will target them. He said, "Hezbollah is an organization that doesn't depend on anyone. There were those who died and those who left the organization, and it didn't affect us," unquote. And even more details, Nasrallah cautioned that Hezbollah will target city centers. "There's no need for us to harm soldiers. Instead of wasting missiles on the north, we will attack the south. We'll bring Israel back to the Stone Age," he said. Explaining one of his targets, Nasrallah explained that Israel tried to get rid of the ammonium tanks in Haifa and did not succeed. "We only need a couple of rockets to hit those tanks, and the number of fatalities will be very large. Even Israelis themselves say that." And then the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, said the following, "Everything I've presented is the minimum of our abilities. It's important to me that Israelis understand that." Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu responded very quickly to Nasrallah's remarks by saying, "We heard Nasrallah's remarks on his attack plans. It should be clear that if Hezbollah dares to do some nonsense and attacks Israel, we will hit him and Lebanon with a crushing military blow." Immediately after Nasrallah's proclamation, Israel bolstered 20 strategic targets. Certainly, Israel has the ability to respond to Hezbollah's attacks, but that is not enough. They must secure their important sites again against missiles. With the passage of time, missiles became more powerful. Their range becomes longer, and their accuracy increases, and Israel needs to make sure, and doubly sure, that they can resist and repel new attacks from these new weapons. It would be irresponsible of Israel not to take the threats by Hezbollah seriously. Back in 2016, after an official assessment, Israel actually allocated 150 million shekels, that's $43 million, to improve security on these 20 strategic sites. Attacks on these sites could cause serious damage and certainly inconvenience to Israelis. It would also be, and mind you, totally irresponsible of Hezbollah to attack Israel's sensitive sites, because Israel would counterattack, and their counterattack would be very serious. Coming up, points of view. First up is a column from the Jerusalem Post. It was written by Tani Frank, a professional lobbyist based in Israel, and was published on July 15, 2019. The column is entitled, "A Seat at the Table." The author argues that diaspora Jewry should have a say in what happens in Israel. This is how the column starts. Last summer, the New York Times published an article entitled, "Israel, This is Not Who We Are." The article was written following the arrest of Rabbi Dubi Hayun, the deputy mayor of Haifa, a conservative rabbi who was detained for questioning in accordance with a directive by the Rabbinical Court of Haifa for performing a wedding without the consent of the chief rabbinate. The writer of the article in the Times described how a series of events, including the freezing of the planned Western Wall deal, as well as the opposition to LGBT rights and the removal of the paragraph regarding equality from the nation-state law, are viewed by Jews in the United States. The writer of the article is no less than Ron Lauder, president of the World Jewish Congress. In the article, he warns of growing alienation between diaspora Jews and Israel, particularly the younger generation. He claims that the government of Israel is damaging efforts to strengthen the bond between this generation and the State of Israel, a relationship that is being undermined. Frank has been setting the stage. Now the author makes the point about Jewish unity and the need for Israel to be more sensitive to diaspora Jewish needs and issues. Frank continues, "One can agree, or not, with the actions of the Israeli government, but there is no doubt that in recent years there has been a serious crisis with diaspora Jews. The climax was around the freezing of the Western Wall deal, which took place on the same day as a bill to block conversions independent of the rabbinate was introduced, and while the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency was meeting in Jerusalem. This was a slap in the face for a lot of diaspora Jews who care about Israel. But even after this climax, the publication of a blacklist of well-known rabbis abroad, including Orthodox rabbis, were disqualified, added fuel to the fire. One cannot exaggerate the importance of our existence as a single united nation, even if our ways of life and religious views differ. It is impossible to ignore the fact that most Jews in the diaspora do not hold Orthodox Jewish views, and that the chief rabbinate in Israel does not recognize rabbis of Orthodox congregations who are on the liberal side of the spectrum." Frank continues to show that the official Israeli rabbinate is out of touch with the mainstream and most connected to ultra-Orthodoxy. Frank concludes, "The most apt expression for the required action at present is a seat at the table to enable representatives of diaspora Jewry to be partners in decision-making. This is the order of the day and the way to reverse the growing alienation between us and our brethren in the diaspora. The crisis with diaspora Jewry will not disappear, and initiatives of joining hearts will not help without turning away from evil. Introducing representation is another way to act on this matter and to change the trend of estrangement between significant parts of the Jewish people who do not dwell in Zion, the government, and the entire state of Israel." Next up is a column by Einav Schiff and was published in Ynet on July 11, 2019. It is a very long title. "The Secular Uprising Could Decide the Election," and then subtitle, "Traditionally right-wing communities are in the forefront of growing dissent against the power of ultra-Orthodox parties who impose their agenda on secular society, secure in Netanyahu's support." Wow, that's a long title. Einav is a senior journalist at Yediot Achronot, the parent company of Ynet, the website. This is how Schiff begins. "The recent move by the Ramat Gan City Council to provide public transportation for the city's residents on Shabbat, taking them to bars and entertainment centers or to the beach, evoked an outcry from ultra-Orthodox politicians threatening to end the status quo and the political understanding between the secular and religious parties. The decision, as polling shows, is in line with Avigdor Lieberman's main political slogan that is gaining support in the Israeli secular community, that religious parties have been forcing their agenda on Israeli society while not sharing in the burdens other Israelis must bear, such as military service. Despite the ruling, Likud's attempt to portray Lieberman, who prevented Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from forming a coalition after the April 9th election, as a cynical opportunist. The point is not the man, the point is the message. And opportunism on the part of Lieberman did not stop the Prime Minister from offering Israel Beitenu leader a blank check if he joins his government. The column continues with a powerful argument. But the logical argument is that while tensions with Iran, the budget deficit, and corruption investigations have not moved voters away from Likud, the question of religion and state may do that because it is becoming the hot issue on the voters' minds. The public is signaling to Likud and its leader that it is time for change, but it seems only certain politicians are seeing the signs. Netanyahu will likely increase efforts to unite the far-right parties, but that may not be enough to provide him with the votes he will need. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to discuss two cartoons today. Both are from Bronco, aka also known as Legal Insurrection. The artist is A.F. Bronco. Legal Insurrection is the title of all of Bronco's cartoons, just like Dry Bones is the title of all of Yaakov Kirshen's cartoons. The first cartoon appeared on March 7, 2019. It is about Ilhan Omar, the first-term congresswoman from Minnesota. The big letters H-A-T-E are in the center of the cartoon. The letter A in hate is Ilhan Omar's face and head. She is holding a sign with the Star of David and a line through it, a circle and a line through it, meaning we all know that symbol of a line through something means no. The meaning here is either no Jews or no Israel. It's the Star of David, of course. In her other hand, Omar is holding a sign that reads, free pass. And she is saying, I'm the victim. One's got to laugh. The next cartoon by Bronco is called Don't Wish Too Hard for Something. It was published on July 8, 2019. In the cartoon, Iran is agitating a hornet's nest labeled Trump. The mainstream media is filming as Iran swats the nest, making the hornets come out furiously buzzing. And the media is telling the hornet's nest to stop provoking Iran. The pot calling the kettle black, so to speak. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. In the middle of his recent fiery sermon, a fiery, charismatic Hamas sheikh named Fatih Hamad shouted that Arabs should murder Jews all over the world. He demanded that followers murder Jews in Israel and everywhere else. A few days later, Ahmed Yosef, who has a direct line to Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, publicly condemned Hamad for calling for the murder of all Jews. Yosef said, and this is important, the language of knives and explosive belts is not suitable for statesmen. And the talk of killing Jews using this kind of language contradicts religion and morality. Hamas is not against world Jewry, and not even against Judaism as a religion, unquote. This exchange is illustrative of a very important issue. Traditionally, Palestinians terrorists struck out against Western targets, and of course against Jewish targets, particularly in Europe. And then they changed course, turned inward, and focused on Israel only. Today, we're witnessing a conflict between these two perspectives and the focus of Palestinian terror. There are those who still believe that Jews around the world should be murdered, and those who believe that targeting only Israeli Jews should be on the agenda. Ever wonder why Russia is so involved in the Middle East and so committed to Iran? I'll explain. First and foremost, there is a significant Muslim population in Russia, and Russia needs to placate their citizens. There has been some Russian-Muslim tension, and it is important to tamp it down. Next is the United States has significant influence in the region. And for Russia, it is very important to keep the United States' interest in check. It is that attitude alone that informs large swaths of Russian foreign policy. Third comes proximity. Russia itself is actually located very close to the region. Their former states are even closer to the region, extremely close to Iran and to the entire Middle East. Finally, Russia and Iran are linked economically. They are both enormous oil producers. Russia is also a huge provider of much of what Iran needs. The election in Israel will be held on September 17th. After the April election, Avigdor Lieberman was the man responsible for preventing Benjamin Netanyahu from creating a coalition government he needed to cinch the position of prime minister and thereby forcing a new election. Now Lieberman and his party, Israel Beitenu, or Israel is our home, have released a campaign that unveils a new slogan. The 30-second video, which was released via Twitter, runs under the phrase, "This is not Las Vegas." The ad cuts to a slot machine with photos of Netanyahu's potential coalition partners and labels them all extremists. Next comes a derogatory comment about the potential coalition members. If blue and white party were to win, the ad finishes with a flourish in white letters against a blue background with a blood-red exclamation point for added emphasis. And in English, the phrase is recited, "Make Israel normal again." The allusion is to Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again." The slogan is obvious, right? The substitution of the word normal is critical. Normalcy is a political defense. It's a condition Israelis yearn for. Hanin Nassar is an Israeli Arab. She's also Israel's best female high jumper. Nassar was chosen to represent Israel in the European Athletic U23 Championships, and that upset some Arabs. Hirak Haifa, a group of Israeli Arab activists, pressured Hanin Nassar to back out of the competition. They went public with a statement, and this is what it read: "We condemn her representation of the Zionist entity that uprooted our people and is using her as a fig leaf to cover up the racism and crimes of Israel," unquote. The group also sent a personal note to Nassar asking her not to represent Israel. What frightens haters more than anything else is normalization. In their narrow world, freedom and democracy are treated as treason. The Jerusalem Post published a report informing us that the Mossad announced that Israel prevented 50 terror attacks by Iran and ISIS over the past 3 years. 12 of those attacks were planned for Turkey. Some were halted at the very last minute. Turkey's relations with Israel have been on the rocks. They've been very rough since 2010. You remember, that's when a Turkish aid ship, part of a flotilla, was boarded by Israeli commandos. Turkish President Erdogan has been a vocal critic of Israel at almost every turn. And yet, despite the vitriol being spewed against them, Israel is convinced that helping stop terror everywhere, including in Turkey, is the right thing to do. Israel's leadership also believes that these connections will help Israel further improve relations with countries all over the world. Iran moves to increase its enrichment of their uranium, has upset countries who signed on to the now infamous Iran deal. It appears that the deal has no teeth, that there is no way to enforce and force Iran to comply with the deal. Additionally, this deal leaves Israel in a very precarious situation. Questions arise. How will Israel respond to the new threats? It should be perfectly clear to everyone that this assertive move by Iran is first and foremost a direct attack against Israel. And then it is a threat against the rest of the Western world. By location, you should know, it's everything in the region. Israel is in the neighborhood, and as a result in the target zone and in the crosshairs of Iran. Israel has a history of interceding when it perceives threats to be developing. In 1981, Israel attacked and destroyed the nuclear reactor in Iraq. In 2007, Israel attacked and destroyed the nuclear center in Syria. If Iran pushes too hard, Israel may very likely strike against Iran's nuclear system. Since April, when Russia launched an offensive to recapture the area of Idlib in Syria, the Russians have bombed more than 23 hospitals in the region. Mark Lowcock is the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. He reported to the Security Council about these attacks on hospitals. Lowcock told the Security Council that he sent a letter to Russia asking for an explanation about the clear targeting of hospitals. He has said he was not sure why Russia would act in this way. Lowcock was especially concerned because on June 20th, an ambulance with a pregnant woman being rushed to one of those hospitals was targeted by Russia. Lowcock tried to find out how and why that happened. And I quote here, "I have written to the Russian Federation to request information as to how the details provided through the deconfliction mechanism are used. End of quote. Russia's response? Lowcock is still waiting for it. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. The second column today discussed the Israeli rabbinate. It requires some explanation. The rabbinate in Israel, the official rabbinate, is not just authorized by the state. It is a branch of the state. That arrangement sounds unusual to us because we're in the West and we've been ingrained to believe in the separation of religion and state, or what they call here church and state. But Israel is the Jewish state. And when the Jewish state was created, all issues of birth, death, and marriage were relegated to the official offices of the chief rabbis. And they have also been given responsibility to oversee issues of kashrut, that is, the laws of kosher, keeping kosher. Because Jews have different traditions and come from different parts of the world, there are two different offices of the chief rabbinate, two different chief rabbis, one Ashkenazi and one Sephardi. In other words, one for those from European roots and one from those from North African descent. Both chief rabbis have branches and representatives in each and every city in Israel. In the civil service ranking, Israel's chief rabbis earn the same and are on the same level as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They also have a system of rabbinic courts in cities, and they have national courts. They rule on cases connected to marriage, divorce, death, births, as well as if the parties choose to go to the rabbinic courts instead of state court. That's for civil issues especially. Not all Israelis are enamored of the chief rabbinate, and I'm speaking even of religious Jews. There are other rabbinates that have emerged, especially in the areas of kashrut, as well as courts that deal with various specific issues. Many of these groups do not accept the authority of the official chief rabbis. There is certainly a slew of politics in the world of the Israeli rabbinate. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.